trinitite identified in the Cydonia region and going a few miles outside of it. Trinitite, and Stan, you could tell me, I believe it's a fair statement to say that the melting of silicon sand to that greenish kind of structure, it exists only on a few places on this planet, one at the Trinity site at White Sands, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Western Egypt, an area that slops over between India and Pakistan, and the Sahara Desert. And now we have researchers that are saying that the Anunnaki, Enlil and Enki, fought each other with nuclear weapons. So how big and what is the scope of interactions going back millions of years between intelligences in at least this Milky Way galaxy that have fought each other, and that we may be the residue of genetic manipulation by those that fought with nuclear weapons? And this is not to be down this morning. This is to say we've all got to face reality, and that John Brandenburg was invited by NASA to do that presentation, and I talked with him 2 weeks after. I said, have you been slammed? He said, I have not had anybody slam me. And he said, remember, my search started by a senior physicist in a classified library who said to me, we know that there was nuclear war on Mars.
Well, some of those responses were a good setup, I think, to my question. I noticed one of the recurring themes is the skeptics in the talks, and some in particular got pretty strong reactions. I was wondering, usually they're a thorn in the side, and at best diluted, maybe at worst manipulated, threatened. Is there a reasonable position of skepticism for those who haven't had that kind of firsthand experience? I think we've kind of alluded to the fact that the UFOs could land outside in the parking lot or on the White House lawn daily, and there's nothing we can do about it. But for whatever reason, they've chosen not to. Is there a reasonable position for those who haven't accepted the evidence as presented? And is there a reasonable role for skeptics? Have they ever proven helpful in maybe guarding our own arguments? I was curious about your thoughts on that.
Well, in my opinion, a skeptic should not necessarily be a dirty word. I think there's a place for healthy skepticism in any area of inquiry, whether it be UFOs, science in general, health, politics, you name it. It comes down to two things. You test things in a way, whatever's being presented needs to be testable. Are the facts true, and is the reasoning valid? The entire argument comes down to those two things. And there are rules in the conduct of inquiry, guidelines that if you follow them, you get good results, and if you don't, you get garbage. And everyone needs to be aware of that, and it actually should be a part of our educational system. Skeptic shouldn't be a dirty word, debunker is, because it's someone who sets out with a conclusion and sets out to discredit an idea in a propaganda sense than any sort of objective evaluation.
Any other thoughts?
Class being the best example. Pass it down to Stan.
Well, there's nothing wrong with being skeptical. We all should be skeptical. That is, you have to say, I don't know when you start your search for truth, whether it's about a UFO sighting or a whole bunch of other things. The problem comes The skeptic has to say, I don't know. Debunker says, I do know. There can't possibly be. And so we ignore all the evidence. I was very pleased. I was asked by a Canadian journalist to speak to an annual meeting of Canadian journalists 60 miles from where I live. So sure, why not? I did, and he told me later, he said, I've never seen so many journalists change their minds so quickly. They just hadn't been aware of how much evidence there is. So there's nothing wrong with their being skeptical. They had no reason not to be until I put a bunch of data, facts, etc. In front of them. So that's the thing, that you want to make sure you get the facts out there and don't deal with the debunkers unless you have to proclaim their idiocy. I mean, they give you plenty of excuses to do that. You know, people, I've had some eyebrows raised when I've said I've debated Seth Shostak, Michael Shermer, and I don't think they'd either debate me again. But you should be encouraged by the fact that in Shermer's case, I got 80% of the vote of the audience. This is on Coast to Coast Radio. He got 20%. That says he didn't know what he was talking about. At least with Shostak, it was 57, 33, 10. But what I'm saying is you can win a debate when you have facts and the other person doesn't. And it's very commonly the case when people are talking about UFOs, if you've got a noisy negativist there, that he doesn't have the facts. Research by proclamation. And the easy way to handle that is to present data. So you have to tell the truth and you have to have the evidence. But the debate is winnable easily.
Just to back up what Stan said, educated skepticism. Know what you're talking about before you open your mouth. A case that I investigated in Illinois was covered on a documentary, and inevitably, we had Michael Shermer and all these other people on there disparaging these witnesses, calling into question their psychological makeup, etc. They never went to Illinois to meet these men, yet they're psychoanalyzing them. They didn't have degrees in psychology, by the way, but they're psychoanalyzing these people at a distance. I mean, it's worse than a radio psychologist. But they're disparaging these people, they're questioning their testimony. They never went on location with the witnesses. I did. To Stan's point, do the investigation, do the research before you start opening your mouth and passing judgment. And I referenced skepticism and skeptics in my presentation, and we talked about it last night at the dinner. When I reference skeptic, I mean that with a capital S. People that identify themselves as the ever-present devil's advocate. Stan says white, I say black. It doesn't matter. They just want to take a contrary position. And that really adds nothing to the discussion. And any field of scientific inquiry, to Travis's point, should have skepticism. There has been a litany of con artists, hoaxers, liars in this field. Again, like Linda said, not to put it on a negative note, but we have to be wary of those minefields. We tread very lightly through this field because people are making claims that oftentimes aren't true. And we certainly don't want to hang our hats on that. We don't want to have egg on our face, and sometimes we may get caught accidentally, but we have the tenacity to push forward and admit, okay, we found out that person's credentials aren't what they appeared to be on the surface, or their claims didn't meet the burden of proof. But we need to be skeptical. I know James is skeptical as a former police officer. He's trained to be that way. But we have to be very, very careful. And all I can say is, if you're going to make statements or pass judgment on witnesses or on cases, and to Stan's point, they often make generalizations. Well, humans are poor observers. Well, that doesn't mean that they hallucinated. It doesn't mean that there wasn't an object there. It just means it may have been 20 feet, not 100 feet in size. But nevertheless, the object was in fact there. So, I don't know if James would like to add anything.
I would like everybody to become acquainted with a person next to them. I talked about this person in my presentation. The rational man or woman. This person should be with you at all times, and you're constantly asking them, what would a rational person conclude if they were confronted with the evidence that's being presented to me right now. Now, that's not to say that I know everything. It's not to say that I'm not going to change my position at some future point when more evidence comes in, but I'm constantly evaluating where I am right now. Has it met some kind of burden of proof? Will it convince other people? Will it convince a group of scientists or engineers or, any particular group that you might want to approach? So I do believe in healthy skepticism. Keep your wits about you. My favorite prosecutor, when he would charge the jury, would always lean back and he'd say, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, don't leave your common sense at the door."
Before we go to the next question, I want to add a little bit to this topic, because I hope that all of you leave here today and go out and kind of spread the word. As crazy as that sounds, you're going to do it automatically, but this seriously is one of the biggest benefits that can come out of a conference like this, is that you go and tell other people the crazy stuff that you learned while you were here, and then they're going to tell, and they're going to tell, and this ripple effect goes out. And so don't ever think for a minute that however small or large a conference is, that it doesn't have an effect on the world, because it absolutely does. Not because of what we say here, but because of what you say when you leave. So when it comes to this skeptical subject, remember this, there's another dynamic to this that is very sinister, kind of. Pursuing the truth takes a lot of courage. Okay, especially if you're interested in this, or if you're a researcher, we've all gone through this, where you go out there and you see the UFO. Okay, well, it might scare the bejesus out of you. Okay, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe you go, "Oh, that's fascinating," but it changes, it rewires your brain. Okay, well, that's hard to do, and it's very, very scary for a lot of people. So skepticism can be used as a form of denial. Okay, almost like a doctrine, or following a particular religious belief, because it's easy. You don't have to think, and you don't have to make decisions anymore. I had an experience about this with an engineer I used to work with in St. Louis. And when he found out I was into UFOs, he was just like all over me, okay? It was back in the early 90s. And so I would debate with him more for fun, because I wasn't getting anywhere. But I found out that he was a subscriber to the Skeptical Inquirer, the horrible, rag that is the negative thing that we all talk about. And what I realized is that he didn't look for the truth. He just read what the Skeptical Inquirer said, and that became his belief system. Okay, so he was a skeptic, but reading this crazy skeptical Bible. Okay, but when presented with real information, he was afraid to examine it. Now, this guy was an intelligent chemical engineer. So keep this in mind. Some people are skeptics that way because they're afraid to learn the truth. Okay, if you have to, sometimes you might have to break through that barrier, and by not being threatening, but like, well, what about this? And you let them think about the questions you ask. They'll come to the conclusions themselves, but you can't change their decision to stay in denial if they want to. So.
I agree, and fear is behind so much of the resistance in a surprising way. Occasionally, I'll get somebody who really blasts me online, just call me everything, and then a lot of hostility. But I respond with, "Don't be afraid. This isn't going to happen to you." And it's amazing how often that actually works. It turns them around. They're apologizing and all this, where the real motivation was just fear. That once I tell them it's not going to happen to you, they're not coming for you. At that point, then it's so much easier to believe. But yes, skepticism. You ask, how do you know this? And by that you mean where can you point me to the source of information where, when I examine it for myself, I'll be as certain of this as you are?
Well, I appreciate the courage, because we all know that the great George Adamski was murdered for doing exactly what you are doing when he was exposing the UFOs, and the fact that when he met with the ETs, that they were wearing the patch of the OWASP sign, the Fate's UFO Bible. But I think it's wonderful, and I hope Cameron will organize, if he hasn't already, a listening group and contact Ivanka Trump, and so I can all see your picture with Trump on Twitter. I'm really enjoying that. Now, in the spirit of this being Easter, I want to, remind us that many of us believe that the Star of Bethlehem was a UFO, and that the storms that happened the day that Jesus was crucified was to cover up the UFO that came back to get his spirit. And so, there's all these things going on, and I'm thinking